Hi, I'm Casey Patterson,
Hi, I'm Felicia Jones.
and this is Thriving While Black, the
The
podcast. So this is our first episode, which is really exciting because we've been thinking about this for a really long time, and the idea of thriving while Black really has been in our spirit for 4 years now. And so to see it come to fruition in a podcast is really exciting.
Yeah, it is. Though it wasn't Thriving While Black, it was just a series of tangents that we now know have formulated into something pretty special. And I'm excited about what we're doing.
Yeah. And we get to use this platform as a way to elevate really conversations that we have all the time, questions that we surface with each other, people that we think about, people that we are inspired by, people and curious about who influence us, influence our thinking. And I think just create a paradigm around what it means to thrive while Black in a way that we don't often get to hear about. So I'm excited that we have this opportunity to bring our guests to the show and not just have them be folks that inspire us, but hopefully who will inspire our audience as well.
Yeah, and hopefully see them in a different light because some people know them, but some people don't know the details about them fun things about them. So, I'm looking forward to learning.
Yes. Yeah. And laughing, because we do a lot of that.
Oh, yeah, we got to have some fun here.
Yes, we do a lot of that. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about our first guest.
Our first guest, somebody we think very highly of.
Very highly of. Anthony Thigpenn, who is the founder and president of California Calls. Yes. He is a well-known and much sought-after political strategist, and I like to call him a movement-building, power-building provocateur because he is really creating new ways of thinking and new ways of being and pushing us out of our comfort zones and giving us, I think, the challenge to think and act more expansively when it comes to our own political courage.
Yeah. He's a man of few words, so it's going to be interesting pulling things out of him. But I think he'll be forthcoming.
Okay, so how did you meet Anthony? How do you know him?
Well, actually, I met him, I don't think he even knows this. I met him when I was 18 years old. I was working for a city council member, and I was a council aide. Basically, I was like a receptionist, and I would take phone calls and greet people. And I remember him mostly because I remembered his name. I thought Thigpenn is a different name.
It's an interesting name.
It's an interesting name, and I thought, who has that name? So he would visit the office often. He would call often. I think he was being an organizer, and he was probably organizing the city council member. So I got to know his name because I had to answer the phone calls and try and connect him to the staff, the council staff at that time. And then fast forward, I reconnected as an organizer through Scope and later through Alert and their C4, and we were doing some
which is another organization he founded.
Another organization he founded, and got to know him. And I'm thinking, this has to be the same guy that would come into the city council member's office. He had the same haircut, like right now, which is interesting.
Same energy, I'm sure.
Same energy, but he was like determined to engage the city council. I can't remember what the issue was, to be honest with you. I was too young to know what was going on. I just knew this guy is very persistent. And so I got to know his name and then later see him in action. I'm like, oh, okay, he was probably organizing. He was probably trying to organize the city council around something, God knows what. I don't know at the time, but that's how I got to know him.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah. Okay, so, and I know where I first met him, where I would say where I first became aware of him, because like a lot of people, you know his name, you know his work before you know him, if you even know him at all.
Right.
And so I first learned about the work actually through COPE, because COPE, your former organization, was part of the African American Civic Engagement Project, which was founded out of California Calls.
Yeah.
And so I got to know Anthony's name and just who he was in the space through that effort. So one, I want you to tell us a little bit about the AACEP project before we actually meet him and hear about the work that he's done in our sector. But then I got to actually work with him back in, I believe it was 2018, when we were, maybe it was 2019. No, it was 2019, actually. They were looking to pivot from the AACEP project because it had been going, I think, for 3 or 4 years at that point. And they were going to be expanding into creating a Black census and redistricting hub. And they needed someone to help launch it. And so through my consulting practice, through Social Good Solutions, they hired me to be the project manager to help launch the Black Census and Redistricting Hub. And so that's when I first got to meet Anthony. And I remember something so signature about him in our very first in-person meeting, actually when he was interviewing me for the position. I went in with an agenda and I said, okay, so here, a typed agenda, and said, here are the things that, I think we should cover. And he told me after the fact, he said, I knew you were the one when you came in with an agenda.
Oh, yeah, man.
Because he is known for that. I mean, he is known for that kind of discipline that kind of rigor and focus. He doesn't waste time. He doesn't waste words. He's very methodical. So that's how I met him, was through the launching of the Black Census and Redistricting Hub. When the hub was sort of past its initial launch phase and was starting to expand and we were going now into implementation, I knew that it was a body of work that was going to require more of me than I had time to give. Because my work was also starting to expand in philanthropy. And I felt in my spirit that I needed to make sure that I was available for the philanthropic work. And I felt that I could be more influential on the philanthropic side than in managing the hub. But I promised him that I wouldn't leave him hanging, that I would find somebody who could replace me and actually implement the Census and Redistricting Hub, which ended up becoming a huge effort. But I helped them raise about $1 million or so for the hub, and continue to be engaged as an advisor, even as I found my replacement to do the day-to-day project management. So that's how I first met him and got to know him. And then when the Black Freedom Fund launched in 2020, in the summer of George Floyd, the aftermath of the summer of George Floyd, it was Anthony who actually brought me into that process very early on because, the funders called him as they would. And he brought me and Reverend Ben McBride into the design and conceptualization process of the Black Freedom Fund. So that's how he and I know each other.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. You all have done good things since that meeting. You've turned that relationship into something powerful. And thank you for that, by the way. The African American Civic Engagement Project, which you called AACEP, is something that he really envisioned for Black-led organizations to really build their capacity and muscle in civic engagement. I think he understood that there was really untapped organizing potential and electoral organizing potential among Black-led organizations. And so they really gave that some dedicated time and attention. That's when I realized he was a no-nonsense guy because he understood what was really at stake for Black organizing, but he also wanted to make sure that we were living into our purpose. And so
Gonna be right and
we
tight.
were going to be right and tight. And he got the affectionate name Uncle Anthony for a lot of us because he would come and set us straight. But we got it together. And I think I'm really grateful for that experience because I do think we got to refine our organizing, really understand integrated voter engagement, which I know he'll talk about a little bit today. Know that a little bit more deeply and how to integrate it because we did live sort of the tension of we're organizing for one moment we're doing civic engagement programs, which are really short term. How do we do some sense making of the two of them? So he really did help us to understand that and understand strategy. I now understand how to be disciplined as an organizer because of the tools that came out of AACP, out of Cali Cause. Yeah, we don't play around.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that because we learned how to be disciplined in our organizing and not just all over the place. And now when you're in spaces that are all over the place, you realize...
You feel it.
You're like, okay, we're talking about a whole bunch of nothing that's going nowhere. And how do we
get focused?
And can we get focused and actually have a plan? So yeah, that we can thank Anthony Thigpenn.
We can thank Anthony for that. And
for all of that.
And also
Right.
I think thank him for organizing philanthropy because he had to organize, I believe it was the Irvine Foundation that funded AACEP. And just to see the experimentation, which, he'll talk about, I know as well, because he believes in leaning into experimentation. He really convinced Irvine to invest in that project. That project then became the foundation of the Black Census and Redistricting Hub, which then became what is now the California Black Power Network. So all of these things build upon each other. And he is really the seed, he really planted all of those seeds. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation with him today.
Yeah, likewise.
He's a bit of an enigma because, he does not make a lot of public appearances. He is very intentional about where he shows up and how he shows up. So we are so fortunate that he said yes to being our guest today.
Yeah, and to be our first guest.
Yes.
So exciting.
It's really, really exciting. And I think for a podcast that is titled Thriving While Black, there is no one more appropriate in the state of California who has the longevity, the strategic thinking, the rigor, and the discipline, and quite honestly, the love and the hope and the belief in Black possibilities that Anthony embodies.
Yeah, he's been unwavering in his hope and dream for a multiracial democracy and sees Black folks as really critical to that.
Critical.
So,
and we are. And indeed we are.
Indeed we are.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be a good conversation.
It's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah.
I'm excited for it.
All right, good.
Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today. It's so great to see you.
My pleasure.
It's been a while, so it's great to see you. Before we get started into the thick of it, so we introduced you as the founder and president of California Calls. Can you tell us a little bit about California Calls, about the organization?
Sure. So California Calls is a statewide ongoing alliance of local social justice organizations. It was founded almost 10 years ago, and it was because people were doing really good work, local work, but increasingly statewide policy preempted that work. And so the idea was, could we build bottom-up grassroots power that could impact the state policy arena to help our communities? And the other thing that it tried to do was combine community organizing and power building and electoral organizing. Typically, those two things are seen as opposite or in contradiction to one another. And we start to bring them together in something called integrated voter engagement.
Well, we're going to talk about integrated voter engagement a little bit later in the show because you are the pioneer of that framework, really, of integrated voter engagement. But before we get into the heart of the work that you do now, we want to go back in time a little bit because I've described you as this legend that people don't know that they need to know until they get to know you. And so one of the things that we don't really know about you is about your childhood. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you grew up and when and really how you began to develop your own political consciousness.
I was born and spent the first part of my life in Watts in South Los Angeles. At the time, the community was 95% Black. There were housing covenants that restricted where Black people could live in the city of Los Angeles. So those were my formative years. I remember growing up watching television shows that were almost exclusively white and being acutely aware of the difference between the fantasy world on TV and my reality and the reality of my family and my community. As I grew up, there were turbulent social times of the civil rights movement gaining steam, multiple assassinations, King, Kennedy, Malcolm X, multiple riots across the country, and the rise of militant movements and organizations in response to that. My father used to always sit us down and make us watch the news on all these events. In fact, on Sundays, he used to sit us down and read us Aristotle. And we wanted to be outside playing, but he said, no, you have to learn this. And so I think I got thinking seriously about the world and some kind of social consciousness from that. The 1965 Watts riot was a pivotal point for me. I was 12 years old, living in Watts, and we watched our neighborhood on fire. And then the National Guard came in and was stationed in our backyard. So all these were pivotal moments for me. And I was inspired by the social movement at the time. I wanted to be a part of them. I became very active in my high school's Black Student Union and political elections in the community. And that sent me on the path that I've been traveling ever since.
Wow.
So Aristotle, huh?
Aristotle.
Are there parts of Aristotle that particularly resonated with you that you recall?
I was a kid, and so it was all kind of a blur to me. I'm sure I internalized a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the main thing was my father every Sunday sitting us down and making us think seriously about things. And I always I carried that with me.
Well, you are a serious thinker, so
Indeed.
He did his work well in that regard.
Yeah. And what high school did you go to? Were you
I went to
Jordan?
San Fernando High School.
Which high
So the first part of my life was in Watts.
Mm-hmm.
Then after the 1965 riots, my father and mom bought a home in Pacoima in the San Fernando Valley.
Ah.
And that was a completely different experience for me because my prior experience had been all Black, 95%. And the only time I saw white people was on TV. And so it's kind of a culture shock when I went to McClay Junior High School and San Fernando High School, which was very multiracial, Latinos, African-Americans, and white folks and Asians all mixed together.
Wow. So the multiracial organizing began in high school, essentially,
yes.
is what I'm hearing you say.
That's
and
correct.
You talked about being very involved in the Black Student Union. And we know that you were involved in the Black Panther movement. Tell us about how you got involved in the Black Panther movement and what did those experiences teach you about organizing and political strategy that continue to shape how you approach the work now?
Sure. So I mentioned, at the time there were these turbulent times and the anti-war movement, the student movement, and the Black Power movement all happening at the same time. I found it very exciting. I was in high school. I was organizing in the Black Student Union and then some political collectives in the community. And there were a couple of Black Panther Party members in these collectives. And, I'm 17 years old. The image of these Black folks organizing against the police to transform society in their leather coats and their black Tams. I said, I want to be that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I moved to Oakland and joined the Black Panther Party and spent a couple of years up there working as a foot soldier. I wasn't a leader. I was just a foot soldier for the movement. And it was foundational for my development. First, just being around people who were dedicating their lives to organizing and building power was exhilarating. We thought we were on the verge of changing the world. We thought revolution was going to happen in the next 2 years. We were very idealistic, obviously, and didn't really understand the power that we were up against. So that's one of the lessons I learned from that. And we'll talk more about power analysis. But one of the things that I took from that lesson was the need to really understand power in more fundamental ways, both the power of our position, but also our own potential power and how do you organize that power. Another lesson I took from that was the dangers of internalizing the dominant culture, sexism, exploitation, internal violence. So while the party was very motivating and moving, and people were dedicating their lives, there are also these internal contradictions as some parts of the oppressive environment was replicated inside the party itself. So I learned to pay attention to that in terms of the kinds of organizing we want. Part of that was the need to develop a different style of leadership. During those times, the charismatic leader was the main model. And I just felt that while there's always going to need to be charismatic leaders, there needed to be a different kind of leadership that promoted other leaders and built other leaders and not just oneself. And finally, just to repeat again, the need to understand power and strategy was the main lesson I took away. And that's been a lifelong journey, how to understand power and strategy, both what we're up against and the potential power we have and how to bring those two together.
How old were you around the time that these lessons started to materialize for you and you started to make these observations?
That's probably 22, 21, 22.
Wow.
So very young, learned a lot, it seems, in that
Well,
4 years.
because the Black Panther Party was a very intense experience. Obviously the police and the FBI thought that it was a real threat, and so people were killed, people were put in jail. I had two very close members, comrades, that were killed by the police as part of our organizing. So that made me take things very seriously.
How did you perceive
Wow.
your own sense of safety during that time?
We didn't really think about our safety until after the fact. Because I think we didn't understand the power we're up against and the fact that they were trying to crush us, which they did try to do. So then after the fact, I began paying attention to things like security and safety in a different way than before.
Wow.
Yeah, all that you're saying, Anthony, it really speaks to the work that you've built in the state over the past several decades, because those lessons are very apparent, in the multiracial organizing, integrated voter engagement strategies that you are infamous for. I was telling someone in the room that you are a celebrity in our world. People talk about you, and some people know who you are without ever meeting you. And so these sorts of ideas and strategies that you've brought into the movement space have literally changed people's lives. And so it's really also our opportunity to say thank you and to give you your flowers for being so pioneering and being able to think so expansively at such a young age.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure about all that, but I do think that my journey was always about trying to learn and experiment and do better in terms of organizing and movement building.
I think you've really been pioneering around this idea of experimentation and allowing experimentation to unfold and use the lessons of the experimentation to really go deeper with strategies. And I'll never forget when we were around the proverbial table helping to design and craft the California Black Freedom Fund, which, by the way, I have to say that when the philanthropic leaders were trying to sort of engineer the Black Freedom Fund, it didn't have a name at that point, and they called you, because everybody calls you when they're trying to figure out how to experiment in a progressive, transformative way. So when they called you, and what you told them was that we really need to be thinking about how to expand the pie. And in part of expanding the pie, you also wanted to be sure that they were expanding the voices of who was around the table, shaping that strategy. So it was you who actually brought me in to the California Black Freedom Fund table and Reverend Ben McBride. And together, we are sort of the three community leaders, if you will, that really helped to shape that fund. But you talked very clearly about why investing in Black power building was essential to the vision of multiracial democracy building. So I want you to tell us about that vision. Why are Black folks the drivers of social progress and sort of necessary in order to catalyze it? Why was it so important to be intentional about developing Black political power?
Well, I guess the first thing was when these foundation heads were wringing their hands, after George Floyd and trying to figure out what this was before they even thought about a Black Freedom Fund. They said, "What should we do? What should we do?" And the first thing we told them was, "Well, don't do what you normally do, which is throw a little money at it, and then 2 or 3 months pass or a year passes, you go back to what you're doing before. You need to do something fundamentally different." And that leads to then the question of why a Black Power Fund. And we said a few things. One, that the reality is that on every metrics, health disparities, police violence, education equities, economic inequality, Black people lead the list. And so if you're really serious about making transformative change in society, those that suffer most have got to be at the forefront of that, because they're going to fight for the kind of systemic transitional change that's necessary. So that was the first piece. The second piece was that building a multiracial democracy requires building relationships and partnerships and alliances with many key constituencies and communities. But true partnerships and alliances have got to be based on participants being of equal power. And so investing in Black power building, since Black folks were key, was an important part of being able to build an alliance or multiracial democracy based on equal power. The last thing I would say is that there's always been this dichotomy where people said either you do multiracial organizing or you're just organizing your own community. And we challenge that assumption. To build a multiracial democracy, I think you need both. Obviously, we want to build a multiracial democracy, but the self-organization of folks that have been experiencing oppression or exploitation is a legitimate form of organization, and in my mind, a stepping stone to building a true multiracial democracy of equal power.
Yeah, say more about that, if you will, because, one of the things, and Felicia's going to take over here in a second, but one of the things that we continue to contend with is this idea that if you choose to invest in Black folks, then you are choosing not to invest in multiracial power building. And I wonder if you could just help folks to get underneath that and understand why that is a myth and it's a false choice.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, to build multiracial democracy is based on alliances and relationships, and it's got to be equal. And if they're not equal, then it's false. And so the need to build our own power is, in my mind, a stepping stone to building a true multiracial democracy. Most of my life, I have fought this idea of counterposing. Either you're doing multiracial organizing or you're doing Black organizing, or Latino organizing, or women organizing. Both are necessary. And I think we had to fight this false dichotomy if we really want to build a true multiracial democracy.
Don't miss part 2 of our special 2-part premiere episode of Thriving While Black as we continue our conversation with founder and president of California Calls, Anthony Thigpenn.